Hello, Global Citizen Class. Today I am joined with.
Lisa. Do you want
Yeah,
me to say my? Do you want me to introduce myself in my
yeah.
mother's language?
Wait. Sure. Go ahead.
Okay. So I would say Lisa Hanson Nadishnikas. I am an Anishinaabe Ikwe from northwestern Ontario in Canada. So what I've said, Samuel, is that my name is Lisa, and I am an Anishinaabe or First Nations woman from northwestern Ontario. I'm happy to see you here today.
Okay. Well, I guess I'll just get into it. The questions. Um, First of all, Lisa, what First Nations tribe are you part of?
Hmm. Yes, I am officially recognized in Canada as being part of Kitchiname-Kusib Ininewug, which is translated to be Big Trout Lake in northwestern Ontario. So if you know your geography and you can find the Hudson's Bay, we're just south of there in the northwestern part of Ontario, which, by the way, is huge, home to over 49 First Nations in a geographic area the size of France, and that's just part of our province in the country of Canada. But the people in that area are actually from two tribes that have become blended because of migration and settling, as has happened in most places around the world. So I actually grew up believing and being taught that I was Cree. And that is actually what my mother had understood for many years. So it sounds confusing to realize come the 80s. It's like, oh no, we're not Cree, we're OG Cree, which is a combination of the Ojibwe people and the Cree people. And when you look at the geography of that part of northwestern Ontario, you would have had the Cree people migrating back and forth because of their hunting and gathering tradition and their way of living that changes with the seasons. And then you also have the Ojibwe people that came from another part, and they kind of met there and started new families and new people groups and communities in that area. So I'm Ojibwe, Ojibwe on my mother's side. Of course, I have a father as well, but that's totally another story. I'm part South African too. So
Nice. Well, I guess on to the next question. What traditions does your tribe follow that would be different from us here in Scotland?
Well, I'm still learning a lot about Scotland, so I'm sure that I'll be able to answer that question even better the more I get to know your home country. But some of the things that my people traditionally practice even today is hunting and fishing and gathering food from the land. And that's especially important right at this time of year before winter comes. People are hunting moose right now, and we're hunting geese and ducks and all of that to fill our freezers so that we have food to eat until those animals come back, especially the geese and ducks. Of course, they will migrate back in the spring, and we'll hunt again. Also, at this particular time of year, there's a lot of work around, preparing the homes and getting firewood. Now, I think that's a tradition in all of the cold parts of the world. It's important to have enough fuel to heat your home and keep yourself warm over the winter months. So, when families work together to do it, it becomes a traditional thing. People look forward to being together and working hard together to make sure that they're going to be warm and fed over the cold months.
Yep. Well, that leads us on nicely to our next question with the fishing and the hunting. Is there any traditional Canadian foods or, I guess, traditional to your culture dishes?
Yes, well, one of my favorites, actually, that I will have some pictures to share in a moment, but it is goose. And it's interesting because I have shared some pictures of our family goose barbecue that we had this summer and got some interesting reactions because, of course, Canada geese are known as pests in parts of the world and in public parks and, in city places where people are like, oh, we don't like all these geese here. How come there's so many of them here? But seeing a flock of geese actually makes us hungry. So when we see them, we get kind of excited because we know that they taste so delicious. But they are a little bit of work. So I just thought I would show a few pictures here on screen for you. I hope that you can see them clearly. Don't be shocked. It's a Canada goose. So, so this was from, let's see if I can get my hand lined up here. This summer, one of my cousins, her son is known as a very, very excellent hunter. And when we hunt, we're not just hunting and shopping for ourselves. When you go grocery shopping, you're usually shopping for your family. But when we go hunting, we're thinking about all the extended family that we would feed and share our food with. And so this particular son of my cousin's is a very good hunter. Let's see if I make this clearer. Wow. I will send this to you, but that's my hand plucking the feathers off of a goose. And this is actually my cousin showing me how to do it because I had never done one before. And so that's another big part of our tradition is learning how to pass these skills on from family to family. And I had such a nice time with my cousin that day as she helped me with that goose. So let me see. Oh, if I back away, maybe it's a bit better. Oh, or maybe not. Can you see that?
Yep.
So that's my other cousin, her sister, with a knife. And what we've done is we've plucked the goose. We've plunged its body in boiling water to sort of get the rest of the feathers off and some of the fat off. And then she held it over a fire to singe the feathers. And now she's trimming up the food because or the meat, sorry. That's the meat from the goose. Looks kind of raw, but trust me, it's about to be delicious. And there you go. We've built a fire, and we've built sort of a little tent, like a triangular tent over it, and we wrapped it. We covered that with a tarp so that the smoke from the fire would smoke the meat. And smoking the meat is traditional as well. What it does is it preserves the meat so that you don't have to have it in the fridge or the freezer for so long. And of course, that's good if you're traveling around on the land and you're hunting and you're at your camp for a really long time. If your meat or your fish is smoked, then it's good to go and it's very tasty. So
nice. How does the landscape in Canada or in your area you're talking about, the lake, differ from Scottish or British areas?
Well, I actually remember canoeing with your family last year. If you remember, we went to Loch Lomond, and it was wonderful to be there on a canoe in that lake. But I remember both my husband and I said to each other, the water feels different here. And that's kind of an interesting thing to say, because how can water feel different in a canoe? But it was sort of the sense of the buoyancy of the canoe. And I guess if we look at it, more intently, all water has sediment in it. Different temperatures of water will have a different feel to it. The things that are growing in the bottom of the lake or the waterway, they do have a smell, and so when the water moves, that smell can come up. And so that is actually one thing that we've really enjoyed is being back on our Canadian lakes this summer, canoeing and fishing and just sort of taking in the smell and the feel of it. And when I sort of contrast that to Loch Lomond in Scotland, I really, it was just it felt foreign, looking at the beautiful landscape, but the shape of the hills, the shapes of the mountains were very different. And also in the wild parts of Canada, the trees come right down to the shoreline of the lake. So I'll show you a picture here about what I mean. So this was actually me fishing on Canada Day, and you can see that the trees are like right bang, they almost look like they're coming out of the water. And I think for us, or for me, that was the big difference. You know, you over there you have a lot of rock or land and then the water, you know, and the trees are separated, and it gives it more of an open feel, whereas here it feels very wild, you know.
Yeah.
And at the same time, I think that while some of the trees are the same, where you live in Scotland, the weather is warmer than it is here. So I felt like I could recognize, not all, but some of the trees were the same, but yours seemed much bigger, taller. I mean, that must be exciting to hear. Taller and bigger. Um, and it's just to say that those similar trees that we have here in northwestern Ontario, in this part of Canada where it's colder, it's the same trees, but they're smaller because we have such long winters and such short summers that the trees have a shorter time to grow. So those are some of the big differences.
Okay. Do you have any traditional clothes / jewelry or anywhere you might not, but maybe passed down from generations?
Well, there's two interesting parts to your question. I do have some things here to show you, but as far as things being passed from generation to generation, hopefully that's something that will start again in these current generations, because my mother's generation would not have had too much to pass on. And there are some reasons for that. You know, she actually didn't grow up in her home with her family, and that had to do with what was known as the residential school system here in Canada. That's a whole other conversation. But she left her family at a very young age so that she could go away to, I think, what you guys would call a boarding school. And so it's a very similar setting. So there was a disconnection there from, you know, maybe what, you know, she would have received, you know, in this kind of way from her family. Also, her mother passed away when she was very young. So there was a bit of a break there. But, you know, in recent years, in recent decades, you know, there is a big focus on restoring these kinds of connections in our First Nations cultures. So there are certainly things that I have even now that, you know, I would be so pleased and proud to pass on to people who are important to me as I get older. But I'll just show you an example of a few things that are traditional to my area and my culture. Keeping in mind, there are hundreds of First Nations communities or First Nations in Canada, and what I'm going to show you just represents sort of the style from our area. So this is a beautiful hair clip, and you know, we often take inspiration from nature, and this is made from little beads. They're called seed beads. And they're put together on leather. And this is a nice soft deer skin, which of course we also, you know, that's another bonus from hunting animals, is that, you know, we keep how to use everything. And so this is one particular style, and I've had this for over 20 years. And it's beautiful, and you would wear it sort of clipped in your hair at the back, you know. I'll send you a picture of what that looks like. And also a much more recent one. This one was made by a cousin of mine who's very excellent craftswoman. But my husband and I recently had a special wedding anniversary, and she made this for my hair on that special day. And again, you can see, you know, the inspiration from nature, lots of flowers and leaves and those kinds of things. And men wear jewelry too. We don't call it jewelry. The words we have for this is regalia, which of course is not a First Nations word, but in English it means these things to adorn and beautify. And I just love that we call these things regalia because they are special and they do make us beautiful. So this is called a choker, and it's for a guy. So my husband, Eric, was given this and made this for our special anniversary. And it's made from bone. So these are bone pieces, and of course the rest are beads. But you can see again, we've got the deer leather there, and it is worn on the neck like this. So he looked really nice, I have to say. But the raw materials, and this would be, I guess, for another little history tidbit, is that we also will make clothing from the furs from animals. And there's a whole interesting story about how this animal, this is beaver, a beaver pelt from a baby beaver, actually, and the connection to the making of top hats, which were worn, of course, in the United Kingdom, and very, very fashionable. And when you think of a top hat, you don't think of it like this, do you? But if you were to cut down these hairs, you would come down to this very fine under hair, and that's actually what they use to make the hats with. So that's one thing we have in common between us and there. So I'll show you two things that are made from beaver skin here, okay? Real quick. This is a hat. So we call it a trapper's hat. So, that's a very sort of a modern style, but it's made from moose. This is moose leather is thick. And this one was very special because it was smoked over a fire, which also makes it waterproof. So this is what it looks like. There, suddenly I've got brown hair. That looks pretty cool. But this will keep you warm, down to minus 30 Celsius. Yeah. So the last piece I'll show you from that is, again, these mitts. So these are Eric's mitts. They're huge. Sorry. Hello. And you can see the familiar sort of style of floral beading, but this is beaver fur, and it will keep you very warm. So that's what we do with those things. So
nice. That sounds lovely. How does the weather affect your culture? Being cold and all that.
Mm-hmm. I think we share a similar saying with you guys over there, that there's no such thing as bad weather, just bad clothing choices. So, and it also gives a justification for why I have 10 jackets and coats and not just 2, and it's because the weather really does affect, how it feels outside and how it makes you feel. So literally from the beginning of September until the end of October, there's 3 different jackets or layers that I would switch in and out of as it gets colder and wetter. And then as that Arctic wind starts to blow, I mean, it just chills you to the bone. But so it is important. It does affect us because it affects the kind of activities that you want to do or that you need to do. And so I'm actually really looking forward to snowshoeing this winter as a, exercise and getting out and about. But the cold air at nights makes you just feel like you just want to get cozy and curl up and just, chill out. And so you do have to be conscious of how your mood is or your energy level is, and also that's why we talk about the weather all the time, and I think making good choices, making wise choices, or dressing properly so that you don't just hibernate like a bear all winter long. So
if you do you have any instruments in your culture that are different from normal Scottish brass or whatever instruments, like any?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, that's an interesting question, because I think the majority of instruments that are common to this area would be considered to be quite primitive. We're talking about hand drums that are made with animal skin stretched over a wooden frame, or flutes again that are carved from wood. Very simple. And in that way, I have to say that's not an aspect of our cultural expression that is developed very well. But at the same time, if you were to ask any of us, what's some of your historical music or dance, we might think about, Indians beating a drum around a fire or something you would
Yeah,
see
yeah.
on a movie. But actually, in this area, it's the jigs and reels, with the fiddle playing fast and the feet are flying and dancing. And that is definitely an indication and a reminder of the founding of Canada was established by people from Europe, including the Scots, the Celts, so those sounds do come through our history. And those dances, a lot of kids, even kids, it's fun for kids to know how to jig and reel and do, the square dance. And, so that's a nod to our cultural roots, which come from Europe in some ways. So.
Nice. What is your favorite thing about being Cree, or culturally different?
Well, I think, this might sound a bit unusual, but I think that because I look the way I do, I don't look very typically Cree or OG Cree. But people that are from this area will recognize certain features, and they can even tell where I'm from or who I'm related to based on those features.
Wow.
And that was amazing to me because I didn't grow up in this area. I grew up in Southern Ontario in an urban setting. And it's really been in my adult years that I have, had the freedom and the choice to spend time in this area and get connected with, my mother's family and those cultural identity kinds of things. And I remember I walked into a waiting room. I used to be a nurse in this area. And an older Anishinaabe woman spoke to me, very quiet and very gentle. That's the way a lot of people are in this area, very soft spoken, which I'm not. So, but she looked at me and she goes, "Are you Tilly's daughter?" And she said my mother's full name, and I was like, "Yeah, yes, I am." And so I introduced myself. But the fact was, my mother had not been in that area for over 40 years. But this woman recognized something about me, and particularly, I believe it was my eyes. So if you just saw my eyes, and maybe not my crazy curly hair, which comes from my dad's side, then you would say, "Oh, yeah, she's from Bearskin Lake," or she's from that Beardy family or whatever. And I love that, because I didn't get that growing up because I grew up away from my family. So it's neat to have people recognize features of me that tie me back to this area. So did I answer your question? I think I went on a rabbit trail.
That was good. Has your tribe ever suffered prosecution or prejudice from either other tribes or non-First Nation people?
Well, that's a very interesting question. There's a couple of ways I could answer that. Right now, I live in a small town called Sioux Lookout. Now, the Sioux were a tribe of another tribe of First Nations people, and one of their attributes is that they were real, aggressive and war-making kind of people. And this place was called Sioux Lookout for a reason, and it's because the people that lived here knew they were coming, and there is a whole history on how they watched. They climbed the highest points in this area and kept watch for the approach of the Sioux, which they did see. And it's calculated that they could see their canoes and the paddles flashing with the water from 17 kilometers away.
17 kilometers.
Yeah, because it was quite a high point, which is quite near here. Eric and I drove up there in our vehicle a couple of weeks ago just for fun, but it is a very high vantage point, and their watchmen there could see the Sioux approaching. And that it would be a little interesting little extra study to do. Maybe I'll send you a link on the rest of that story. So it's a little bit, it's a war story, but that the people here were saved. They saved themselves because of how they planned to hold off the Sioux, and that the Sioux never came back here. So that's kind of an interesting thing about where the people here were under persecution and they were about to be pushed out of their lands. Well, not pushed out, they would have been killed. And then their land would have been taken over by, this warring tribe.
Yeah.
In more contemporary terms, there's a lot of history in Canada, as there are in many nations, of, how people, their conflicts that they have with one another. And I can say just in a short way that, just 40, 50 years ago, it was illegal for any of my mother's people to be off their land without permission. And the land was really limited to, excuse me, their land was really limited to, what the government at that time defined as, this is your place, this is your community where you live, and they called them reservations. So they actually needed a visa permission to go off their land. And so that might seem a little bit unjust. That would seem a little bit unjust. And there were people that were imprisoned for it. So anyway, but more currently, I think that there can be a misunderstanding when people have been mistreated or they feel that there have been injustices shown to them in the past. They can sometimes feel that they have a right to be discriminatory against others or be judgmental toward others. And so it's kind of interesting to be here at this time and see this shift where, 25 years ago, someone like myself might have said, I'm being discriminated against, or I'm being oppressed. But now there's this kind of this anger or an awakening where people are like, hey, no, I'm going to oppress you, and so that's actually not a good thing. There's no such thing as reverse racism, unless you're meaning to say that it's love, like extreme love. Racism is racism no matter which way it goes, and same with discrimination or, sort of oppression. And I just think there's an awakening in people's consciousness right now, and I don't think it's necessarily in the best way. And, so we see kind of these tensions now. And I have even experienced it myself from different facets. This might be something that you want to edit out, so I'll just make a comment about that. But I'm not fully 100% Anishinaabe. So there are Anishinaabe people, even in my family, who actually push back on me because of that. So that's an interesting thing that we didn't necessarily see so much before. You don't hear talked about. But I think we're coming to an age where we can learn more about each other without the labels and learn to accept and appreciate each other. Our cultures and where we come from is important, but I think it needs to be broader than that, because that's the kind of world we live in now. It's a global world, and we're global citizens. So.
On to our last question now. Nowadays, does the government help your people differently to not First Nations people?
Oh, so do we have any special benefits or?
Yeah, like that.
Yeah.
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 I don't know.
Yeah. Well, part of the treaty agreements that were signed between the Government of Canada and the different First Nations people all have different conditions and responsibilities in them. So one of the responsibilities, I think one of the benefits that I have personally appreciated and wish that more people would take advantage of, is that as First Nations people, our education in university or postgraduate and beyond is paid for by the government. And so my desire would be that many more of us would take advantage of that and, use your perks and be educated and expand your knowledge and how you can apply it. So, yeah, I had a free university vacation, I almost said education, sorry, and postgraduate as well. So that's one of the things. The other things are that because I am a First Nations person and I'm working in a First Nations territory serving First Nations people, I don't pay any tax. So all of my income is tax exempt. And that's a huge perk, upwards of 40% of a salary that people would lose in tax or have it invested or redirected elsewhere. It's not a loss necessarily, but yeah, I get to keep it. So that's very practical. And there's a few other things as well concerning lands and fishing rights. If I'm in my home territory, I don't need a license to hunt or fish, presuming that I'm feeding myself and my family. So I think that's a huge benefit. So.
Like the fishing, is there anywhere like in Canada that maybe that your tribe isn't allowed, or any places that people still like attack you for, like not attack, but like say kind of like football teams, if you didn't support you wouldn't allow them like in your house because you wouldn't want to be friends with them. Like you're allowed to go to that city, but they wouldn't want you there, and you might be discriminated.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I can say that, Canada's a huge country, it's massive.
Yeah.
And I can just say that my husband, he's from Western Canada, and where he was from, there were some strong feelings about First Nations people, and not necessarily in a very, good way. And I remember when I first went out there to visit him before I got married, I felt uncomfortable. I felt actually a little bit unsafe because I know that people were just seeing me, on my outward appearance and then making some assumptions about me. And that was actually very hurtful. And even though that was 25 years ago, I can say that I have experienced that a little bit. And not necessarily directed at me, but people would make comments to me, even now, about my people. And because I'm sort of in this in between, I'm half and half, I'm this and that, they feel like they can say it to my face. But yeah, there are some strong generalizations that are, not, maybe we haven't made a good impression sometimes on people, and that's what sticks with them, so they make a generalization, and that does very much still happen. There are parts of Canada where land is in dispute, whether, who does this land belong to? And of course, this is one of the areas of awakening, social awakening, where a lot of First Nations people are defending or trying to, exert their ownership over land. And there are current stories where there are standoffs in those places. In Southern Ontario, the Six Nations of the Grand River, a place called Caledonia. There have been standoffs there between police and citizens and First Nations people. And you'll see interesting pictures, that people have painted their faces and they're wearing feathers. And they're sort of going for the movie quality, but there's something about those symbols that do make us think of war. And there are places where there have been land disputes where people have lost their lives, or First Nations people have been shot and killed by police. And usually that's not unprovoked, so I'll be fair to say that. But yeah, it's not the days of the Wild West aren't behind us. We still find these things in our news today. So.
Okay. Yes, that brings us to the end of this interview. Thank you, Lisa, for being here, and thank you, Global Citizenship Class, for listening. Goodbye.